Sounds good.
Oh, shoot.
YouTube Live is something that we're pretty new to, though, so it's
Sounds good.
all right. And let's see. I'm just gonna share this in the Facebook group.
So I stream my webinar live to Facebook. I didn't realize you could do that and
Yeah.
YouTube simultaneously.
I'm actually Facebook jail for a random post from 2021. I shared an Instagram post to a private group, and it hit me like a week ago. So,
Oh,
I'm
they're penalizing you?
yeah, I'm unable
Yeah.
to go live or advertise for 30 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Do you need me to put it live?
I'm doing it right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just but yes, you can do YouTube and that live. But I also have another program that I can use to do it simulcast if we want to. But we are
Interesting.
all right. And we are live with this very special episode of the Warrior of Impact podcast. We are streaming live on YouTube. We wanted to make sure that we ended Mental Health Awareness Month the right way, and we wanted to talk to somebody who's like right at the source and living this every day in the sense of advocacy and service to the mental health community. And so we are absolutely thrilled to have our guest today, Peg Morrison, who is the Assistant Executive Director of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and she operates out of the North Carolina chapter. She's been involved with NAMI for about 13 years and has 20 years experience in nonprofit management, communications, and development. And she is fellow North Carolinian. She's right outside of Raleigh, like Shannon and I. And so we are so excited to have you on. I personally am very much looking forward to this conversation because I think that these are the conversations that we have to have. Like I was just saying, 12 months out of the year. I'm glad that we are in a society now that at least gives the highlight and the spotlight, for the 1 month, but we need to bridge the gap now, and hopefully this is a place that for us as our platform we can do that today. So thank you for coming on, and just tell us a little bit about you, NAMI, and give us the oversight, the overview, if you will.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to be here. This is exactly the type of conversation that NAMI loves to have. In fact, NAMI was founded by a group of mothers sitting around a kitchen table in 79. They all had adult children with schizophrenia, sons with schizophrenia, and they were just trying to figure out how to manage the stigma. They were being blamed. They didn't get help. They were basically told that their kids had a life sentence and no hope. And they found that they couldn't change the big picture, but they found the power of talking to one another and understanding, building each other up. And within a few years, they had a little conference. They thought would be a little conference for 30 people. They got 300. And NAMI has grown since then. We're the nation's largest grassroots organization on mental health. And we're the street smarts of mental health. We're not the clinicians or the doctors. We are the ones who help you deal with the rest of your life. So I personally have mental health challenges in my family tree and in my life. My mother lived with depression and anxiety, and I'm the youngest of 6, Irish Catholic family. We didn't really talk a lot about feelings. The goal was to be stoic. And when she asked for help, because she was really struggling when I was very small in maybe the 70s, they gave her Valium. She couldn't run a house and raise 6 kids with Valium. She was a homemaker. So she just muddled through and called it her Irish melancholy. So fast forward to me, I'm more in the Oprah generation. I wasn't raised to be real comfortable with emotions, but I'm in that generation where people started talking about it. Thank God. Because that's such a huge and important change. And it means so much to people to just acknowledge what's going on really internally. So I did pretty well. I was a creative, quirky young person. I was a good student, and it was probably in my 20s or early 30s when my mental health challenges started to bubble over. Had maybe had moments of anger or had moments of anxiety and depression, but it got to be more where the little moments were of feeling okay, and the everyday feeling was just harder and harder. And as I was telling y'all before the recording started, I didn't want to be someone who took medication. I thought that was for those people. Everyone did counseling, but I didn't want to be a scary those persons. And I tried everything. I did jogging, meditation. I took St. John's Wort. I joined Toastmasters to get my public confidence up. I had my dogs, my emotional support animals. I needed medication, and it took my then husband telling me, you need to get serious help if you want to continue being with me, before I got very serious about therapy and medication. And that's what made the difference for me. And around that time is when I discovered NAMI. I was in a place where I was extremely uncomfortable in my own skin. Social situations had gotten really hard. And it was ironic because I had always been someone who had friends, but that script just flipped and was gone. And I discovered peer centers, which is a place for folks with mental health challenges, trauma, substance use. Peer centers where everyone is in the same boat and you can speak freely. NAMI was in that category for me too, where I could finally be comfortable in my own skin. And I started working in mental health. I'd worked and done pretty well in my career. I went back to school, and that's when everything fell apart. I'm in grad school, and I had no structure. It was much harder than I expected. School is tough because there's always something hanging over your head. It's very difficult. Anyways, I left with a graduate degree, but not sure I'd really ever work again. And I ended up working in mental health, the equivalent of an Alliance or a VIA at the time. I was living in Ohio. So I started part-time, doing finally medication and therapy, went up to full-time, and I worked for supportive housing and finally NAMI. So NAMI is very near and dear to me. I've gone from thinking I might never work again and could probably never get along with people again to where I am now, which is I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay.
Good. We love to hear that.
I think one of there's so much that I want to like dive into with all of this, because I think that you laid out a really good structure of kind of a path that a lot of us take in our mental health journeys. Let's start with the fact that, I love that you made the distinction between the clinical approach to the everyday, on the streets, in it, approach.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that those are really that's a divergent approach to being a change maker, right? It's, there's certainly sides from a clinical side, which is oftentimes what we think of when we think of resolution of mental health. But when we talk about advocacy, it's generally not the same people. It's not the clinicians. It's not the therapists, as much as they want to be able to be out front. It's kind of hard to treat and to advocate. So that's why I think organizations like this and so many others are so vital, because it is an opportunity to have a voice to the voiceless, or maybe like in your situation and many others, it's that beacon of hope.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to show people that here's a resource that you might not have even known about, and then when you find it, it then takes you through that next step. So I too was raised in a predominantly Catholic family, where asking for help was you just didn't do it, and so the stigma of asking for help from a cultural standpoint, which we always we played off. A lot of like the mental health aspect is it kind of plays in line with like that Catholic guilt that you oftentimes hear about of well, it's not shame, it's guilt, and it's not that you really have something going on here. It's this root of something else, and I think we as a society we push for the cultural differences in the wrong times, and I think that this is like one of those like places when it comes to mental health. It's the conversation just needs to be like, I need help, period. And we are really big proponents on, like yes, no, and why are period statements. Like you don't need to have follow up. If I say I need help, that's it. And I think that that's where we are getting towards by being able to break the stigma of asking for help and normalizing seeking assistance and support. But what is your experience? And I think it would be beneficial to kind of like maybe break down some of the stigmas that we kind of like run across beyond just like the cultural difference. Obviously there's things like pride, and there's things like shame and guilt, like I had mentioned. But what are some of the things that you recognize being inside the organization as well as maybe through your own journey?
Like what kind of stigma have I faced?
Yeah, or like what sort of stigma, like the reasons why you see people maybe resistant towards seeking help or getting help.
Ah, that's a good question. One thought that I want to share that came to mind about my own family experience before I answer your question is I went through a phase when I was a kid of crying a lot, and my parents just had no idea what to do with that. And my mom just said, you can't just cry all the time. You can't. Because she didn't have the skills to do something more helpful than that. As far as why people don't seek treatment, they don't want to admit that they have a problem. I'll use myself as an example. I grew up with this feeling of I'm okay. I have a lot of friends. I'm an achiever, not an overachiever, but I was solid. And I didn't want to let go of that. It's very painful to let go of that vision of yourself that you have growing up, or that dream or hope of where you think you can go. And it's very painful it's like hitting a reset button, like, okay, all my expectations are going to go out the window. What can I actually do? So yeah, I never gave it a second thought growing up that my career would be easy and successful, which at my age now in my 50s, ridiculous. But yeah, so that's a big thing, is that letting go of old hopes, dreams, and expectations. I also think there are cultural barriers. If I'm a person of color, the vast majority of clinicians are white. And so, maybe I'm an African-American male in my 30s or 40s. I don't want to talk about medication, sexual side effects to a young white woman who's my therapist. And that's a huge barrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say too, for me personally, I think that the idea of therapy is very overwhelming, because for me, I put off seeing a therapist for so long because I did not want to talk about the trauma I had been through. That can be very daunting, to sit down and talk to someone about all the things you've gone through when you're trying to not think about them, when you're trying to put them in a little box in your mental closet and not deal with it anymore. And so for me, the thought of sitting down with a therapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist and going through everything I've been through in my life was just so scary for me. And I think for a lot of people, they don't want to have to talk about that. They want to go in and say, what can you do to help me get over this? But really and truly, the only thing that can help you get through it is to talk through it. And that can be so scary to do, because especially if you're someone who has like PTSD, you start talking, you get flashbacks, and you dredge these things up. But the truth of the matter is you have to get all of that out to somebody. And that's the only way that you can start processing, dealing with it, accepting it, and moving on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have some early life trauma as well, and it is hard to revisit that. Yeah, the mind maybe doesn't want to call that up or remember. I have a friend with a lot of trauma, and she's gotten a lot of good help, but she hates going to a new person because you have to fill out that form, write it all down, repeat it all again. And she feels like once people hear her story, they can't look at her the same way, that, they see her as a victim, or they see her as a sad, broken person. She might be feeling great that day. And that brings another point to the power of peer support. Is we need clinicians. I needed medication. I've needed therapy, but you never can quite get rid of, there's a little power imbalance. And that doesn't go away. With NAMI, all of our classes, support groups, presentations are free. And everyone in the room, including the group leaders, have been in the same shoes, whether you live with a mental illness or you're a family member, one of those mothers with a child with schizophrenia, and you're at your wit's end trying to help them cope and then also keep your own mental health okay. So we have classes and support groups for both, because they can be very different perspectives.
Yeah. And I think one of the really big things that we don't recognize, even that we do as a society as a whole, is we have a breeding ground for this natural comparison of what life should be versus what life is, paired with this ideology that if you're not this certain way, that you're broken. And the idea that anybody is broken is probably one of my least favorite trends that has kind of like come upon, and it's put in this like juxtaposition of this like beautiful broken kind of like thing that I think does more damage than good. Case in point, so my journey is very much health related. I've had a lot of struggles. I have dealt with PTSD, like diagnosed PTSD, for about 20 years. And stemming from physical trauma that was done from surgeries. And, I've had experiences where I have, I flatlined 7 times, had 9 strokes, 7 heart attacks. I was paralyzed for a year. And for the longest time, I was just the sick kid. I was the person who was always dealing with the struggle. I was the friend that you just maybe always didn't want around because it was just always something which felt like drama or whatever, but it was just always like gonna be a traumatic thing. As I got older, I was like, that's because I was living in trauma. As I healed, and that's where I got the notion to recognize the thing that always got me through was that introspective nature and strength that I found inside of me, that I ultimately called my warrior spirit, which is what I, have become for so many people as my, as a coach, and as I serve the community in my way, is really helping other people tap into that. But it still comes from a place of, I could have just as easily fallen into the traps of saying, I'm this victim, woe is me, I am always going to have this health thing, I have an incurable disease, it's never going to be fixed, I'm always going to have these things. And the thing about trauma is you're constantly working on it. It's not a matter of notice I didn't say like I had PTSD, right? It's something that you're constantly working towards, but it is not me. It doesn't identify me. And that's something that I don't think we recognize when we first start the process of treatment, because we know that just like anything, whether you are overcoming addiction or you are, starting a treatment process, or maybe you are recovering from a physical trauma, or you are reliving and having to do talk therapy or EMDR or whatever process you are going in your state of healing. When you realize that it's starting to work is also kind of when you realize that it's a lifelong journey, which can be overwhelming for a lot of people. And
I
this
wanted
kind of
to-
puts you in this start-stop sometimes. Even if you find something right, sometimes you kind of backtrack. You get off your medication. You stop seeking help because it gets overwhelming. And the thing that I really try to champion is finding that strength in you to keep going, because as soon as it feels difficult is really at that moment where it's on the other side of that difficulty that you find the peace. And for me, like, that's it. Like, I don't seek happiness, not because I don't believe in happiness, but I find more life in peace.
I wanted to go back to something that you said, Mike, early in what you were just explaining, but the first therapist I ever saw, she said the most harmful word that you can use is should. When you say, because it always puts yourself in a point of not being able to deal with what is. My life should be like this. Says who? Who says your life should be like that? And so I have really tried through the years to say to myself, don't put yourself in that should trap. Your life should be this way is only something that is a lie that you're telling yourself, right? We talk about the lies we tell ourselves. That word should is one of those lies.
Don't shit on yourself.
Exactly.
You just gave us our little Instagram quote for the episode right there.
Yeah,
One of many nuggets to come, I'm sure.
don't shit on yourself. Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think that the thing about that is we are, whether it's cultural or introspective, we are by nature comparative. We are always, because that's how we learn who we are in a lot of ways. It's the nature versus nurture argument of how we develop. The issue is when we are surrounding ourselves with, the wrong role model or the wrong environment, especially when it's an environment that is deteriorating your mental health, because oftentimes we are put into a position where we are being victimized, but then it quickly turns into that victim blaming mentality, which then is that breeding ground for trauma or deterioration of our mental health, whether it's your living environment, whether it's your family dynamics. And oftentimes those are the barriers that I find are the hardest, because they're not the easiest ones to break. Sometimes, it's hard to cut off family. It's hard to leave the marriage. It's hard to, identify that your child is the one that needs help. And these are the things that having other people as sounding boards and having a community to build that support around, I think it's necessary. It's not just it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think is the kind of, when people first, come to NAMI, are they generally starting their journey, or are they somebody who has already been kind of doing it and maybe trying to do some of the more the introspective work, like, or you kind of see people on all sorts of parts of their journey?
Well, we do see people on all points of their healing journey. One of the most common calls we get on our helpline, we have a helpline, which I'll mention, we're open business hours, and it's 800-451-9682. It's for North Carolina only, but there's also a national helpline, which I think will be in the available on the program. One of the most common calls we get is from a parent who has a child who is struggling, and maybe it's an adult child, and they can see that the adult child they've stopped eating because they think their food is poison. They have an apartment, but they won't stay home because they feel scared there. They're at their wits' end, and they're trying to figure out how to help someone who's struggling, or their child is still in school and they're trying to figure out how to get what they need from the school. Some schools are better than others about having resources and making them available so that the child can have an individualized education plan, and their needs can be met that way. We also do get people who are referred to us by the suicide helpline, and they're looking for peer support. They're looking for a feeling of community. And usually our helpline manager picks up those, but if I get one, I always try to spend a lot of time with them and let them know that I've been there. I've called that helpline just once, but it's very memorable when you're in that space. Go ahead.
I want to mention the hotline too, because I know that we call it the suicide prevention line, but I've used it in the past for moments of just overwhelming, struggle. Because that's what it's really there for. It's support of any real chaos that you're in. And so I think that it's important that we put that distinction out there. It's like, yes, certainly it is this vital tool for, if you are at that level of hopelessness where, suicide is an option, that's certainly what it's there for. But it's also an option to keep you from even getting there, and in that preventative nature. So I think it's these people are there to really help and serve you through that, and these people are fantastic individuals that are really there to just listen and support and do what they can.
I'll tell you that talking about the crisis line or the suicide prevention line, I have been in my life several times at a very serious point as far as suicide is concerned. And I say that those people on that tip line saved my life, because I was so scared that I was so close. And I called them. A lady came to my house. She sat with me for hours. She did not push me. She just listened to me. And then at the end, when I had said everything that I felt I needed to say, she said, "Let me find you someone who can help you. Let me find you." She found me a bed in a hospital. She helped me get in there. She helped me really and truly through those first steps of saying, I need help. And those people are so important. And I cannot stress enough that if you are in that mind space, call that number. There's no shame in that. No one is going to shame you. No one is going to say to you, "Oh, you're overreacting." They're going to take you seriously, and they're going to do everything in their power to help.
Absolutely.
That is fabulous. You had the perfect response, and I'm so glad that you did. Honestly, when I called the suicide hotline, I was not super impressed with the help that I got. I think it was a young person. She was, and they're volunteers oftentimes. And she said, "Well, what's going on with you?" And I told her what I was upset about. And she said, "Okay, and that's all."
No, the lady I talked to was excellent. She came to my house and she sat with me, I think 5 or 6 hours, where I was just on the edge. Like it could have gone either way. And honestly, I feel like that lady saved my life. I mean, she was fabulous.
That's beautiful. I would just say, I think the suicide hotlines, I would call it again if I was in trouble. Just maybe keep in mind that you might get a young volunteer who will say the wrong thing. It's not personal. I felt lucky that I know enough about how things work and how a mistake like that can be made. It didn't devastate me, but
right. And if you're not getting the support you need in that moment, hang up and call right back. You'll find, hopefully, I mean, and I know it's, look, when you call like the DMV and you finally get through and you don't want the answer, you call right back.
Or any customer service line, right?
So let's talk about, kind of it's not even the elephant in the room anymore. It's just like what we've got going on now in life. And that's the real pandemic of mental health that's gone on the last couple of years because of COVID. I think that, and so at the beginning of COVID, Shannon and I actually we were we did a project where we did these micro documentaries on local businesses and the community.
Hmm.
And one of the things that kept coming up, and we actually wound up putting an episode out there with the help of some social workers and stuff, was focusing on the mental health side of the pandemic at like in real time. And it's something that we've, obviously recognized with, suicide rates, the mental health, domestic violence, drug addiction, drug overdoses. Like it's a real crisis, and it's unfortunately a pandemic in and of itself, and like an epidemic in and of itself, that we're not really focusing on. And so I think that there's a lot of value in just kind of talking about, what we've learned maybe over the last couple of years about how we approach this going forward, so that way, as COVID comes and goes, as other tragedies come upon us, we could be better prepared. So what is something that like being involved with the mental health side through COVID, what are some lessons that you've learned, and maybe like not even like good lessons, some of the things that you saw that just really maybe were disheartening, because I think that we can learn a lot from that too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's great that you're calling attention to this. One thing that NAMI North Carolina has been focusing on since about 2019 is loneliness. And there was a big health study published a few years ago that showed an equivalency. The effects of loneliness on your health is the same as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. It's very powerful. And folks who have mental health challenges are much more likely to be lonely. We find it harder to connect socially. We find it harder to find a social group where it's okay to not be okay, or, it takes a degree of understanding and acceptance.
And there's a lot of disassociation that goes along with mental health and mental health disorders. And so I think that puts people in a box. So that's just one aspect of mental health, is that you do become lonely because you put a barrier between yourself and the world, not meaning to, but it just happens.
That's a good point. Yeah. And when my own mental health was in the crapper, I wanted to be around people. I wanted acceptance, but when I would get there, I just had anxiety. I might dissociate. So I didn't have the tools or the wellness to build that.
Yeah, I like to look at it like this. Like, there is certainly a healthy approach to chosen solidarity. You could do that healthy. Like, I am an avid hiker. I love disappearing into the woods for weeks at a time. Like, to me, that is me and my grounding process.
Mm-hmm.
When solidarity is forced upon us, that is something completely different, because it is we don't like things being taken from us, right? We like to be able to be manifestors of our own destiny and control as we can. And so if you pair that with somebody who might have some of these mental health, we'll call it the crisis moments, or an opportunity to where it could kind of bubble up, and you pair that with somebody who's like maybe like an extrovert like me, who has now been home for 3 years. I don't think we really understand the long-term ramifications, because I'm always at a place, the idea of going out now, and it's not a fear of catching COVID as much as it is of the normalcy of being at home and in this isolated bubble, has almost taken over the desire to go out and be the social butterfly. And I think that's gonna be single-handedly one of the biggest issues that we see, I think, for the foreseeable future. And I don't think that we are focusing on that enough. And I don't think we're recognizing the long-term ramification of what that's going to mean for us as a from a mental health standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a societal standpoint. When you have people like me who love to be around people and really feed off of that, who have kind of just reserve that, notion that like, all right, well, that's just not for me now anymore. And granted, I find other paths, but it's still not the equivalent of being fully, living. And I think that I see that a lot too with children. I'm a full-time single dad to a 13-year-old in middle school who
Mm,
spent 2 years, school with me, at home. And school's still not quite the same. We just got back from a trip at Disney. It was not the same. And it's just kind of like the new norm is really kind of a destructive norm in a lot of ways.
mm. There has been so much hardship for young people, the isolation, if they're in a home situation that isn't comfortable or even abusive, there's been no pressure valve. And we were talking before about the feeling that you have to have that perfect life. I think for young folks in particular, social media really reinforces the feeling of I'm missing out, I'm not enough. Look at how perfect everybody else is. No matter that they publish only when they're up and they filter their photos and it's
Yeah.
not real at all.
Yeah.
But we look at those, I think especially young folks are vulnerable to it and they feel less than. And we have seen even pre-COVID, the suicide rates for young Black teens, young adults have been increasing while the rates for a lot of other groups have gone down. I don't know where it will go from here with COVID because I think you're right. There will be a big impact, but it's been very tough.
Yeah, and I
My
think
question.
go ahead,
Oh,
Shannon.
sorry. I was going to ask her. Have you guys seen a rise in addiction or
Mm.
addiction?
I believe there has been. NAMI is more focused on the mental health side of things. Our helpline calls jumped by about 20% at the start of the pandemic, and it was all pandemic related: anxiety over being sick, anxiety over losing my job, anxiety over dealing with my kids and keeping my job. It put mothers in particular in a real tough spot. I mean, if you're a mom and you can't work from home, how do you deal with that? Very tough.
I'm a single mom of two, a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old. My 21-year-old has a lot of health issues. She was in college. My 17-year-old, she once we struggled a lot with online school. I mean, at some points I was at my wit's end. um, and then I dealt with when they went back, she didn't want to go back. She still doesn't want to go back. She still wants to go back to virtual school. And I feel that it's important for her to have that social engagement. But I wonder for how many other kids that's the same, that they would rather stay at home because for 2 years, that's what they did. That's kind of her freshman year in high school was the year that COVID happened. So that was really her high school experience.
Wow.
Yeah,
Very tough. It all makes me think too of my grandmother's generation. She was born around 1900. They had the flu pandemic of 1918 and they had world wars and the Great Depression. And when I think of depression age people, I think of, how burdened they were and how responsible and, usually very frugal. My parents were born during the Depression and they carried some of that. How will this generation be impacted by all these challenges and traumas?
Yeah, and I look at that as well as somebody who has, like a 13-year-old, like they are the modern generation. Shannon's kid, they are the modern generation. And so being born in like the early 80s, and I look and we look, kind of like the last couple of decades, the 80s, kind of we had, some tensions. We had Gulf War. Then in the 90s, we had, everything became this mainstream, music, culture, technology. Then it was everywhere. And then we had 9/11. And then we had, wars and, and it's progressively just gotten, more normal. And my fear is that these things that occur on a world, and we've always had these things. I don't think that it's any specific generation can say like, oh well, there are obviously times where it's worse. My fear is the like how we are desensitized towards it though over time, where because we do have, at the click of a button, we can rewatch history. At the click of a button, we can see, more violence now on a cartoon than we, would ever have experienced in any other part of life. And that's not to demonize, entertainment or technology. It's just the life that we have. And my fear is because the solidarity of, staying at home and, and all these things, and there's no wonder that the most popular thing for everybody was to jump on TikTok, right? A short attention span, clip-based, app that everyone flocked to because it was just enough to keep your attention, but also just enough to be able to move on to the next thing. And that's where, I really launched a lot of my coaching stuff during the pandemic. I started using that as my platform to get my voice out there. So there is good that can come from all that stuff too. But, when I look at, things like that, it really is, I think, a key focus that we, these are things that I think conversations like this are ones that we need to bring to the mainstream. And I think these are the conversations that happen that get us to the place of ending the stigma. Really recognizing, well, what are we doing that is either benefiting or taking away from somebody getting on their own journey? Because I think that if we're contributing to others, mental health decay, intentionally or unintentionally, we need to understand that. And then we need to understand what we can do to help and support, maybe taking away some of those distractions, because I think distractions show up as falsified opportunities often, and we put a lot of time and energy into some of the wrong things, and then oftentimes maybe make the situation a little worse. And I try to make sure that I'm doing my best to prevent that, whether it's the words that I'm speaking or the use of our platform, which is why it's important for us to have a lot of these conversations every week.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the more we're able to talk about our process, our emotional journey, the times where we felt ashamed and how we overcame it. I talk a lot I have a NAMI webinar called Thursdays with NAMI, and it seems like we talk quite a bit about self-talk and how do we improve self-talk and how do we grapple with that inner critic, or I'm in AA, we also call it the committee. That sort of chitter chatter where we're constantly critiquing ourselves. And it's very easy to shut myself down if I'm having an off day and I don't pay attention to caring for myself, so that, my brain gets time to rest and I don't fall into that negative hole.
Right.
Yeah. We talk a lot about that too, how words have power, and the words that you say to yourself help you create your mindset. And so when you speak to yourself, be gentle, be kind, try to use words that are positive. So we talk about that a lot too, about how words have power. And again, just like I said before, the therapist told me, should, that's a powerful word. You need to take it out of your vocabulary. So I wanted to speak really quick also about how people stigmatize themselves as far as, or how they turn themselves into a victim because of mental health. And that is, for a long time, I was so angry. I had so much rage because I felt like, because of the trauma I experienced, I felt like I had mental health issues, but someone had done that to me. Someone had forced that on me, and I should never have had to go through that. I should never have had to have that experience. And so I was so angry until I really started researching and I really started learning about my mental illness. And like I said earlier, I have bipolar, and it's genetic. Nobody did that to me. Nobody went in and changed my brain chemistry. And so I think that a large part of mental health is acceptance that
Mhm.
somebody didn't do this to you. Obviously, you can go through trauma and it can worsen your mental health, obviously. But at the end of the day, once I started researching, that rage gradually went away because I started to understand this was something I was born with, just like you're born with diabetes or anything else. And that there's no shame in taking medicine, because if you were diabetic, you would have to take your medicine, and there's no shame in that. So I feel like for a lot of us, letting go of that feeling that someone did it to us, that accepting that this is the way that I was made and it's the way that I was meant to be made, and there's no shame in that.
Acceptance is huge. It really is. Yeah, thank you for that message. It's something I've struggled within myself too, is that balance between validating my own feelings when I've been a victim, when I've been treated wrongly, versus, okay, I've given myself permission to feel that. I've acknowledged that that was wrong. There's nothing I can do about it. When is it time for me to try and move away from that and shift in another direction where I can build and not just be focused on the past? In particular, if, we've talked about growing up in a stoic family where you don't talk about emotions, usually you're going to get some emotional invalidation in that culture.
Absolutely.
So, and that, that causes a kind of an emotional glitch later in life where I feel invalidated pretty easily. So that's a real challenge.
So there's something that I talk about a lot with my coaching clients, and I've talked about on this podcast. There's a process. This is a 3-step process that I think we all have to go through before we take our first step on our path. Before we even start our journey of transformation, there's this 3-step process. And it goes, the first is recognizing when you were a victim that you were actually a victim. And I think that's so key because we are so quick to misinterpret being a victim with being in a state of victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
When you are really victimized, when you were persecuted, when you were hurt, when you were attacked, recognize that you don't have to try to solve it, you don't try to have to fix it, but just recognize that first and foremost you were a victim. And there's scales, there's a spectrum there, obviously, of the level of victim, how much of a victim, what level of trauma we're talking about. But I think we all at some point have some level to where we're in a situation where we're victimized in that sense. And so just recognizing that, okay, in this instant I was a legitimate victim.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we do from there is to move from there is find the education that you need to understand beyond being the victim. Understanding who you really are through the process of really diving into getting to know yourself and doing the research. And I like to think of that as just educating yourself on you. Really just figuring out, well, who am I beyond this thing that happened? Because in that moment, you get to then not let that identify you. Very, very similar to how I kind of moved my path along. I wasn't just the sick kid. When I learned about myself was, I'm a strong dude. I'm a warrior. And the more I leaned into that and understanding that, I was like, well, what does it mean to be a warrior? And then through that process, it brought me to my third step, and that is a level of an epiphany where you recognize that the strength that you're seeking is already inside of you. And that is often that strength. All you need to do with that strength is then now take the first step. Because once you can get to that level, you have been able to accept that you're ready to go forward. For some people, that process of those steps could be done in a week. For some, it's years. For me, it took me a very long time to be able to understand. But by the time I got there and I was able to recognize it, I created the blueprint. And that's now
Mhm.
what I do for others is I help them create that blueprint of navigating that path as well as the rest of the path to fully embracing their strengths, so that they can stand strong as a warrior. And I think that that is vital for any part of transformation, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical health, whether it's, success, relationships. It's We have to do some of that interpersonal work, and the beauty of it is it's that part is becoming a little bit more societally acceptable. The personal development self-help sector is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And the beauty of it is you can approach it from any angle that you're comfortable with and generally find some way to work. If you're somebody who is extremely spiritual or religious, you can take that approach and you can find that way and that path. If you're somebody who is really looking at it from a internalized, strength struggle, sacrifice gain, I see that a lot more in my men clients that really want to have that like struggle that they have to overcome approach. There's ways you can do that. There's the woo-woo approach of spirituality, and I don't say that in slander because we certainly love woo-woo.
I was fixing to say I'm woo woo
Yeah,
100.
we love the woo-woo because I think that it's an approach that really marries so many of the blends of to it. But I think that the key here is find your approach to how you can start. Look, if you are on a path to a healthy discovery, and it is something that is serving you right, then you can't do it wrong. As long as you are doing something that is serving you right and making you healthier, because look, we've got to focus on the health part of mental health.
Mm.
And I don't think we do. I think we're so focused on the mental part that it takes away. It's no different than going to, like I would go to my heart doctor. Why wouldn't I go, like I care about my heart health. I got to care about my emotional well-being, my mental
Mhm.
health on a biochemical level. It's all, relative. And that's why I think however we find our path to it is the right path. As long as it is
Mhm.
doing it in a healthy way that is not obstructing other people's journeys, I think that find your way and find your path, and then find out how you can make it easier. Because I think once we kind of find a way to implement it into our life, some people find it through like we have obviously found our path to serving others through our journey, which I think is the most beautiful way to really find your journey. I believe
Mhm.
that there's really only one purpose that we have in life, and that's service of others. What we're really seeking is the instrument or the actual execution.
Mm. I support that.
Yeah. And I think that that's a perfect segue into our hot seat questions.
Ooh, okay.
Now that we are talking all things warrior, these are questions that we ask to all of our guests because this podcast is all about having the conversations that help us. We know what we call a warrior. We've defined that, through our elements of being a warrior. But I also know that I'm not right about everything. So I want to be able to listen to other people's opinions and really be able to have this collective unit of being able to say, what does it mean to be a warrior? And so these questions are really meant to enlighten all of us, and really have that part of the conversation. So our first question is, how do you define what it means to be a warrior?
I've put a lot of thought into that question because I've never seen myself as a warrior necessarily. I do see myself as someone who's strong in the sense of being a survivor. I'm strong the way crabgrass is strong. I just keep coming back and you can't really get rid of me. Um, what I see myself doing as a strength that might have a warrior aspect is helping people tell their story and developing my own story. I actually have a book that I started many years ago, but I feel like it's tied to my recovery and I can't finish the book before I feel ready. So maybe I'm a story warrior.
Peg, I want you to just know you absolutely are a warrior. You help people every day.
Absolutely.
So, absolutely, I have so much respect for you because I know what you do. Hearing these stories, working with these people, it's not easy. It's not a simple task. So you definitely are. You said you don't think of yourself, but you really are.
Yeah, I think one of the beautiful
Thank
aspects
you.
too is like because when we normally think of like storytellers, because we're in the world of media and things like that, we oftentimes think of like stories from creating a narrative. You are helping people create a story that is really for them to share with themselves, which I think is like beautiful art in its own way, right? It's,
Mm.
it's uncovering a story that might not ever have to get told, but it's just bringing it to light in and of itself. Uh, that's the value in that for sure.
No, I love that. Thank you for your comments, both of you.
So our second is very telling here. How have you demonstrated that in your own life?
That strength.
Yeah, that strength of being able to embrace, like you said, that keep coming back, that resiliency and defining the story and living that story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one example happened for me in grad school where I was having such a hard time and I was very stigmatized. I wasn't socially okay. Um, I would sit down in a class and people would move away from me. It was kind of brutal socially. And so I finished the degree just because I'm that stubborn. Like I say, I'm crabgrass. I'm that stubborn. I worked very hard. And I had a friend who had a similar experience at this university in Ohio. And she had this thesis that she had to finish. And she was from Lithuania, so language was a bit of a barrier. And I sat with her and I coached her and got her to finish that thesis and made sure that she got her degree. So I felt like I was able to say, all right, this university isn't really supporting people who color outside the lines and aren't fitting in well, but we're going to get our degree and we're going to be okay. Um, and the webinar I do for NAMI was kind of my baby. It was something we wanted to do we were looking for ways to reach people during COVID, and suddenly our free classes and support groups weren't happening because we couldn't get together in person. So I wanted a virtual outlet, a way to give people the NAMI experience, which is to have these real conversations where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say what's really on your mind and talk about your journey, talk about, we've covered sexual abuse, we've covered racism, we've covered involuntary commitment. Like you said, we're willing to go there into those uncomfortable places and have those conversations. And that's something that was my initiative that seems to be having an impact. And I'm grateful for that.
Excellent. So, what's one piece of advice that you can give somebody to help them live into that?
My biggest piece of advice for anyone struggling is to be gentle with yourself. When I speak with people who have the challenges that we have, they're always hard on themselves. And it's almost there no matter where they are in their journey. We're angry with ourselves. If only we'd handled that interview better, if only we had done better at that job, if only we'd made another choice. You do the best you can with what you have. You don't know what you don't know. And I try to remember that rule. Would you treat your friend that way, the way you're treating yourself? I think that gentle self-talk, that self-compassion is the most important thing.
I often say, talk to yourself like you would talk to yourself if you were 6 years old. Would you say that to a 6-year-old? No, then don't say it to yourself.
Mm.
And there is a level of acceptance, but there's also a level of saying, yes, I'm angry at myself, but if I was angry at a child, how would I handle that? If I was angry at my pet or whatever, you wouldn't beat it up the way you're beating yourself up. So just be gentle with yourself.
Mm. It's a nice way of framing it.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we like to do towards the ends of our episodes is make sure that we give you some time that if you wanted to come on and talk about a specific thing that we didn't get to. We got into some pretty intimate things that we, went through and we spent a lot of time on. But, in preparing for, being on the podcast and us preparing for, interview, I think it's natural that we kind of take a narrow-minded view at certain things that are things to focus on, and then things naturally come up in conversation, and we don't always get to the things that we want to talk about. So we try to leave some space if needed for all of our guests if there's something that they maybe wanted to bring up that we didn't get to talk about. So we like to give that space if you would like it.
Well, thank you. I think we've covered a lot of good ground. I just always want to encourage people who are feeling hopeless, because I've had many moments in my life of feeling hopeless. And I just encourage people to keep walking towards the goal. Try to think of a time when you felt okay and realize that you can feel that way again. And if there are people in your life who are judging you and not accepting you, you can find a family of choice. You can find a place like NAMI or a peer center or a friend, a circle of warriors. There's a space for you. Call NAMI, call someone, and find that space.
Yep.
That's something we could do a whole show on, is toxic family.
Yeah, I have a group of friends. We call ourselves the chosen family. Like we are, because there's a difference. And that's the whole point of, like, we have a Facebook group that we run, and it's our tribe. It's a tribe of warriors, and that's the whole thing. It's, this is not just a Facebook group, it's a tribe, and it's, because that's what you say. It's like, find your tribe, right? We want to make sure that you're, with people that can support you. It's not just, finding resources, it's finding the people and the resources that are right for you, which I think is key. So with that being said, let us know how people can find out more about, NAMI, how people can get in touch. We're going to certainly put all of this information and resources in the description of this episode, but give us a quick rundown of ways that people, maybe also how people can get involved.
Oh, sure. Well, we just had our NAMI walk on the 21st. So every year we have a big walk. It's an awareness raising event. We had food trucks, we had balloons, we had people walking, all for this cause. Again, it was one of those spaces where it's okay to be you, whoever that is. We have free classes and support groups. You can join them. You can become a leader if that feels like a good fit for you. We have local affiliates in many of the counties of North Carolina, about half the counties. And with our virtual programs, you can get involved from anywhere, maybe start a NAMI in your area. If you'd like to call our helpline, that is 1-800-451-9682. It's a business hour helpline. It's Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, 800-451-9682. And our helpline manager, Virginia, is just wonderful at listening, giving warm support, and letting you know what's available in your area. She has this resource manual that's bigger than a Bible, and she'll find out what's going on near you that can help.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being on. We don't say this lightly, but we certainly are going to have you on again. I think there's so many different layers that we can go into with this. And it was just absolutely our pleasure to have you on. I think that we covered a lot. And, I think that there's this bittersweet truth to the fact that we are, recognizing Mental Health Awareness Month. But I think if we are going to recognize it anyway, this is one hell of a way to wrap it up for sure. So thank you. And we look forward to finding ways that we can continue to support the good that you're doing, and make sure that we are steering people in that direction that can find value.
Well, that sounds perfect. I've had a wonderful time. Thank you, Mike and Shannon.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome, Peg.